You're listening to the Stokes podcast, real and inspiring conversations with individuals from all over the world who have become their own icon. Be inspired to take action and step into your best stylish life. Hi, and welcome to the Stokes podcast. I am super excited and honoured to have Mica Millar with me today. Hi, Mica, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's lovely to see you.
You're welcome. I'm really excited for us to have a nice in-depth chat. Looking forward to hearing all about you and your journey and your new album. So Mica Millar, born in Manchester. She's an independent soul artist, has an incredible voice, and interesting enough, I connected with her on Instagram just because I saw her pop up and started listening to her amazing records and was fascinated, and we connected on there. So really excited to dive in. Mica, welcome and thank you for coming on. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and, you know, how you began your career in the music industry?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a very long journey because obviously, as you know, Heaven Knows is my debut album. So, you know, I have been involved in music for a number of years and certainly writing songs from a very young age. So that was sort of where my journey began, I suppose. I loved to express myself through poetry and music as a kid. I grew up in a very musical family. So there's always, my dad's a musician, so there's always, you know, musicians in the house, songwriting and music always playing and all that sort of stuff. So I suppose it was kind of destined in many ways. But yeah, I found songwriting as, you know, to be a really good way of processing emotions and expressing myself as a child. And, you know, I suppose it's just kind of developed from there, really. I've been involved in, you know, numerous music projects over the years, working with different producers and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But I think really for me, I kind of came to I think I always knew this, but I sort of came to the realization at some point that if I wanted to put across my songs in the way I wanted to put them across, that they needed to be approached in a very particular way. And so, you know, it's taken me a long time and a lot of learning to be able to facilitate producing, arranging and writing an album, you know. And so that's been my, I suppose, aside from, you know, doing gigs and all of the other stuff in the industry, you know, that's kind of been my creative journey, I suppose.
Right. And I know you've just released your debut album, Heaven Knows. Talk to me a bit about the album. Where did the inspiration come for this particular album?
It's a great question. I mean, there was a period of time, a lot of the songs were written probably over about a six or 8 month period. And I was just in my studio continuously just writing. And I go through bouts of that. You know, some people write every day and that's their way of doing it. But I sort of compartmentalize, I suppose, and I go, right, and I get very obsessive about things. So once I get into a flow of songwriting, I'll just do that over a long period of time. So yeah, they were kind of a batch from, you know, a particular period, but some of the songs, you know, one of them, Nothing's for Keeps, which is on the album, I think I wrote that when I was about 20. And it was one of those songs where it felt like it had stood the test of time for me in terms of what I wanted to put on the album. So, you know, the inspiration for writing always comes, I suppose it's from different places, but my approach to songwriting is very different each time. But, you know, often I'm just sitting at a piano and I'll maybe play some chords and sort of sing over the top of it and see what tones and what lyrics or words jump out at me. So I used to write a lot like that. And more recently, I suppose, I've taken a different approach, which is sort of like stream of consciousness songwriting. So it's people do stream of consciousness writing. I don't know if you've ever done that, you know, where you get a piece of paper and you just write something down and you don't think what you're doing, you just kind of write. So I like to write songs like that these days. I find that a really an interesting process to see what kind of just comes out naturally. Downriver on the album was written entirely like that. So from start to finish, you know, I wrote all of the lyrics and the melodies like that. Flashlights, I used that approach, but that was a little more, there was a lot more sort of tweaking and molding and shaping and picking out words and going, okay, so what's the meaning of that? And how can I develop that into something? And often I don't think I know what the songs are about until I finish writing them sometimes, you know. Yeah.
And is there anything, I mean, apart from like doing like the stream of consciousness, which is a bit, it's like the book, The Artist's Way. Have you read that book?
I've read that. I have.
It's amazing. Yeah,
Yes.
I love that book. I sometimes go back to it because I think it's something that, you know, it's an ongoing journey, right? The creative process. But is there anything in particular that you do kind of to get into the zone for songwriting? Or is it just like you just feel that urge and you're like, yeah, it's flowing now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are times when you don't feel that urge and, you know, you should still sit down and create because you never know what's going to come out. I always think songs are like catching dreams, you know, like if you don't do it then and there sort of thing, it'll never come back to you, you know. So I do, in periods of time where I'm writing, I do tend to, I'm not saying force myself, but kind of get into a routine of being like, right, I'm going into the studio now. But usually that is sparked by some sort of creative idea where it's like, oh, I just feel the need to write something, or maybe it's about processing and maybe something's happened and it's like, okay, I need to like go into my little cave and process this, you know, or I'm just feeling a particular way and I want to express that. So it's always different, but you know, once I'm in that state, and normally it's at night, you know, I like to write in the evening, you know, put some low light on and, you know, sort of vibe in that way. Yeah, so it's, you know, but it's different every time. And sometimes I do write in the daytime, you know, if I'm in that flow, once I'm in it, that'll last me for a few months, you know.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So do you find that it's like to write, you know, to get into songwriting, do you need to go into the studio or do you get bouts of inspiration like in the shower or maybe in the nature, or is there anything like that sparks things?
Definitely. I mean, you know, it's interesting because there's one song, My Lover, which is the first single I released solo, that I wrote as a poem, sat in the park first. So I was outside and I was sat with my friend and she's very creative and I think she was drawing or something, and I was just, it was sunny and I was sitting outside and I was thinking about a relationship that I'd had. And I decided to write that out as a poem, and then I brought it back into the studio and then developed it into a song. So I definitely do that, although, you know, my general process these days is not, you know, that's the first time I've ever done that with a song where I've written a poem. I always see poems as kind of different, you know, the way that they're phrased and things like that. So, yeah, I've never done that previously and I haven't done it since. Maybe I will, you know, but no, a lot of the time I'm sat at a piano, you know, because I think that getting usually that's how I would start. I would play something, you know, some chords, and I would kind of feel what resonates with me, and that's usually what sparks the creative idea. I might play around lots of different things before I hit on something that's in that moment resonating with that particular emotion that I'm feeling, and then that will kind of open the gates, I suppose, to, you know, lyrics or melodies that might go over the top.
Yeah, right. Beautiful. So it's not like you just sit and write it down. It's like more like you go to the piano and that, like just hearing some chords kind of sparks you. Yeah, beautiful. It's so interesting to hear about different people's creative processes. Yeah, because they're all, you know, so different.
Sure. Yeah, people approach it in so many different ways, don't they?
And are there any times where you like really struggle and you're like, I need to write some more, like, because you want to, I don't know, like compose for an album, write for an album. Have you ever found yourself in that real struggle when nothing seems to be coming up?
Yeah, definitely. You know, there are bouts of things. I suppose when I get in, I've got so many songs, I have to say, on this computer. There's thousands, you know, of ideas and, you know, bits of ideas or things that are almost finished but not finished, or, you know, so I definitely suffer with that as lots of artists do. You know, trying to complete something is always quite challenging. So if I ever do go through those bouts where I'm like, I'm not coming up with anything new, there's always voice notes in my phone, or, you know, something else on the computer that I could listen to and go, well, let me just add a bit to that. If I'm not in the mood to finish it, maybe I'll just see if anything new comes that I could add to it, or maybe I'll work on some instrumentation for something. So I think if you can be kind of constructive about it in the times where, you know, you've not got anything new, then, you know, revisiting, there's so many old ideas that I would love to revisit. There's too many of them, you know, where it's kind of overwhelming and you think, oh, one day that song should see the light of day, really, you know, because it's good. But so sometimes I like to do that anyway, because I feel like they're getting left behind otherwise.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I write a lot, and so often, like you were saying, if something's not flowing, I'll go back to old things that I've randomly written, and I'll be like, okay, well, this is actually like what I need to kind of finish right now, or when you're doing something, you think, well, this isn't that great, but maybe it just wasn't the right moment for that particular creative idea to be processed and completed, right? And I think as artists, and I think as creative human beings, we sometimes really struggle with that. No, I need to finish things, but maybe it's because it wasn't or isn't the right time, and like trusting in that divine timing for things to happen when they're meant to, right? I think
definitely
as humans, we struggle a lot with that, like, especially in the society that we live in, that it's like so goal orientated, and, you know.
Yeah, definitely. There were a couple of songs that I had been working on for this album, actually. I started off, I'm not saying I started off with 17, but I took to the studio with 17 songs originally. And obviously there's 14 on the album. One of them I ditched because I was like, actually, that's not good enough. And the other two, and I don't like it anymore. I fell out of love with it. Mind you, you fall out of love with things as you're doing them, don't you? There were a couple of songs that are on the album that very nearly didn't make it. You know, think, oh, that's not quite right. And then, you know, you go through the motion of fixing it and making it right, and ultimately it comes out. But there were two songs which, you know, I absolutely love. Two of my favourite songs for this record, which, you know, I took them all the way down the road almost to completion, sort of thing. And then I was like, that's not right, you know. Oh, wow. And if I want to make it right, I'm going to have to go right the way back to the beginning. And actually, I'm not prepared to do that right now, and they can be saved for later, you know. Yeah. So it's a great thing to have something like that you feel like good about to go back to. But I think you're right. There's a lot of pressure to finish, and that's the most difficult thing, I think, with any kind of creative project, is like, you know, you get to a point where it's those final details, you know, writing the songs is one thing, and then recording them is another thing, but the process that happens between, you know, first initial recordings and mastering is the biggest part of it, which is that shaping and molding things and choosing, you know, guitar parts to go in different places. And, you know, that took me months to do. And certainly, like, heaven knows, the title track, I worked on that for 6 months, and I had to just keep going back to it. There are probably 15 different arrangement versions of that song, you know, until I finally was like, I've cracked it, you know what I mean? Because it was a 12-minute recording. So, you know, I think it's hard, isn't it, to finish things, and there's a huge amount of kind of I suppose dedication and motivation to crafting something that at points doesn't feel particularly creative in some ways, you know, when you're going like, how do I get this from what it is, this creative idea, into like a finished thing that can be released? Those two things are very different, aren't they? You know, Absolutely. And that's the hard bit, I think. That was the bit I struggled with most. And trying not to get distracted and being like, oh, let's go and write a new song or come up with a new idea. You know, it's like, no, focus, no more songs, you know.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's always so hard. It's really hard for me. I'm like, no, I'm going to go and do this. It's like, no, just stay where you are. Sit with it.
Stick with it. Sit with it. That's it.
Yeah, no, fascinating, the whole creative process. It really is. So on the album, is there any song or, any particular song that has like a kind of, a place in your heart, a special place in your heart?
It's so funny. I always say this, and maybe it sounds silly, but I feel like, songs are like like your children, aren't they? So like you birth them, you mold them and shape them, and then you send them off into the world and you hope they'll do all right. I haven't got any kids, so my songs are my replacement for my children. So it's hard when someone asks you that question, because obviously they all signify a moment. They're very honest, the songs, and they are about my life, and they are about people who, real stories or real people. So they all have a moment in time that I reflect on. And what I think's amazing about manifesting and creating something that is a real thing is that even for me, I listen back to them at different times in my life, and they mean something different to me, or I hear something, people will say to me, oh, that line in this song means this to me. And I think, wow, yeah, I'd never really thought about that, having that impact, a line that I've probably just not really connected with myself that as much as other lines in the song, for example. But, I find new things in my own songs, and I love that, So, I mean, Heaven Knows obviously is like the mother of the songs on the album, and it took me such a long time to get that to where I wanted it to be. And I think it really represents sort of my whole creative journey, I suppose. That's why it's the title track, because it is that like, that moving between mindsets of like self-belief and being like, yes, you can do this, or completely just feeling like totally lost and like full of self-doubt, being like, what have you done? You can't, you're not going to finish it, or, and it's not as kind of, not that that's shallow, but you know what I mean? There's other sort of depths to it for me personally. But I think the whole thing, that song just, I can keep going back to it now, on this journey and going, everything's going to be okay. You know what I mean? It's all going to be fine, when there are moments of like, oh God, So I think, Heaven Knows definitely has a very special place for me as regard to this particular album. But yeah, as I say, all the individual songs have their moments and their meanings.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, because they're all like you said, like your children. So it's like part of who you are. And so some are going to resonate with you more strongly at some times than others. Yeah, I love Heaven Knows. I think that for me is just such a powerful song on so many levels, but it's just the whole, like you said, this, shift between different mindsets of like believing in yourself, and then all of a sudden it's like, what am I doing? And just trusting the process, right? And it's like, heaven knows, like, just
come back, be centered. Yeah. And that's another one where I wrote the lyrics for that, and I did not know what I was writing about when I was writing that, and it transpired. It was really weird synchronicity that I'd written it on Valentine's Day. I didn't realise it was Valentine's Day. And while that may, to most people, be like, the day of love, my grandfather was born on Valentine's Day. And he's died now, but he was a real, he was a comedian, and he was a real... I had a really amazing relationship with him that I built when I was a teenager, and I was going through some like difficult times, and he kind of, took me under his wing and was, mentoring me and, all of that sort of stuff. And he was just like a really interesting character, let's say that. And I wrote that song. And then after, I think it was like the day after, I was like, it was Valentine's Day yesterday. That's like Grandad's birthday. So it wasn't, for me, it was like Heaven Knows, a lot of people creatively say that they, they're channeling things or bringing things down from the ether. And I think it's good to sort of like own your creativity and be like, this is mine and I did create it. But I also do think, there's an element of that, like I said, with the dream catcher sort of thing, you're catching things from the ether, aren't you? And things that are sort of in the, I don't know, in the universe, waiting to be channeled, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's this book I read, I don't know if you've read it, called Big Magic.
No, I haven't.
It was by the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and I can't remember her name now.
I can't either.
Big
That's terrible,
Magic.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone completely out of my head. But anyway, she talks about how ideas come to us and how if we don't catch them and develop them, they'll just go to someone else.
Yes.
And that's why, like, choosing to, you know, take action on an idea is important, especially if it really inspires you, because otherwise it will just go off to the next dream catcher, basically.
Right, yeah.
But that was an interesting
concept. I love that
concept.
as a concept. Yeah, it's so nice, isn't it? It's, you know, I think because it's also kind of humbling in a way, that, isn't it? Because, you know, that helps you to not get lost in your own sort of like, well, I can do this and, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of like, it's more of a collective thing, isn't it? Which is a nice way to look at creativity, I think.
Yeah, it's a great book if you get a chance to read it.
I will, for sure. That sounds good.
Yeah, it's really good. Maybe her name will come back to me. That's terrible. I can't remember her name.
That always happens to me in the moment when I'm trying to tell people things.
It's like, damn. So I know, you know, you had an accident back in 2020, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
How did that transform you as a person and I guess your career?
It's a good question, and it's a deep question and hard to answer. It transformed me in a way that is, I think I'm unrecognisable, perhaps, based on who I was before and who I am now, for sure. I think when you have a trauma, there's a lot of processing that has to happen. And, you know, I really struggled with that in the initial stages. I had PTSD, but what you call disassociation, basically. So at the time of my accident, I went into kind of like fight mode, which is typical who I am. You know, when I've gone through therapy about it, it's like, this is like, I'm like taking responsibility for it while I'm in absolute agony with the broken back. And so nobody, even the people around me, even my best friend who was there, they didn't think I'd broken my back, because I was so sort of like, right, what are we doing? Call the ambulance, you know what I mean? And not, you know, for somebody who'd had such a serious injury, obviously people's initial response to that is that they would assume you'd be passed out or you'd be screaming or whatever. And because I wasn't doing that, it was almost like the response from everybody else was not really what was needed in a way.
Right.
And so that was a very traumatic experience. You know, the woman at the trampoline centre where I had my accident tried to move me, for example, which obviously you would never do to somebody with a spinal injury. And I knew something had happened, you know. So, and I haven't really talked about this publicly because it's, you know, it's really personal, but that was incredibly traumatic. And obviously, as you can imagine, if you feel like you've had a spinal injury and then someone's trying to move you, the heightened sense of sort of emotions around that, of sort of fear of your life being completely destroyed and you know, being paralysed or whatever, is so intense. But I hadn't really processed any of that at the time because there was just so much going on. And obviously afterwards, you're just dealing with the sort of physical situation, which is like, I'm in pain, I'm in a back brace. And, you know, so is it really traumatic? And I also had a lot of like, I suppose there was, you know, I was so lucky that I wasn't paralysed. When the surgeon came and showed me my X-ray of my injury and my spinal cord, it was like, he was just like, this is a miracle, you know, the fact that you're not paralysed. And I've connected with like a couple of spinal charities and all the people who've had spinal injuries. And, you know, there are a number of people who've had pretty much exactly the same injury as me, who are paralysed from the waist down, and let's say without function of anything from the waist down, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a layer of, you know, when you know that, you want to feel grateful, don't you, that you aren't in that situation. Absolutely. But equally, you've also had a huge thing happen to you. So there's a lot of kind of weird sort of emotions going on with all of that stuff. And I suppose my journey with PTSD therapy and all of that kind of thing has been, the one thing I wanted to get out of that was I'm really interested in empathy, and actually started making a documentary about empathy a number of years ago, which has never been finished because the album had to take precedent. But I came to the therapy sort of saying, I want to not feel angry with the people around me in that situation. And I don't want to feel angry with myself either. I want to be able to express empathy. And at the moment, I don't feel like I can. Basically, I'm pissed off with everyone, excuse me.
No.
And myself, and so there was a lot of anger inside me after that. And I'm really lucky that I had done a lot of research into empathy, and actually, the whole thing about bystander effect and my reaction to it and me going into sort of disassociation with it was, having done that research, has aided me in that kind of coming to an understanding that the signals that I was giving to people just weren't really signifying what was actually happening. And that's what happens, it's evident across loads of research, so it's interesting to have that experience. And I suppose what you learn from an experience like that is you learn how resilient you are. And I always thought, I'm really resilient, and in a crisis I'd be all right. Or you imagine you see people who are really inspirational, don't you, and they've gone through something really hard and they just like turn it and make the most of it. And I've always hoped that I would be that sort of person, I suppose. And I feel like, despite the challenges, and I've gone through that therapy now, I've just come to the end of it and I'm feeling really good, about the whole thing. And I feel like I've come to terms with my physicality and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, it will be an ongoing journey, you know what I mean? But I think just knowing and feeling like proud of how resilient you were in that situation, and still getting the album out and, still making the most of it, and not just going into a hole, and knowing that you're capable of doing that is something amazing, I suppose, to learn about yourself. And absolutely. I take a lot of pride and a lot of a lot of power from that, I suppose. And that gives me, I think that's just given me a totally different outlook on life in general,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really important when we go through trauma to actually give ourselves space to grieve, because often, especially when our characters are, that resilient type of human being where we're like, no, I have to carry on. And I think it's really important that we allow ourselves to feel all the emotions, like the anger, the sadness, the fear. And because that in itself is transformational, when we can allow ourselves to actually feel those things and then come out of it on the other side and be like, okay, well, I'm proud of, how I moved through all that. And like you said, it just makes you look at yourself in a completely different light.
Definitely, yeah. I think, the processing of emotions thing, but, if you have disassociation with PTSD, one of the things that I thought was just so amazing, which I'm really happy to talk about now, was we did what's called reliving therapy. So you basically I don't know if you heard about it, but you close your eyes and you describe what happened to you, but as if you're there. So I am doing this, etc., etc. And I, at the time when we were going in to do that process, I was like, I'm fine, do you know what I mean? I have got all these things like flashbacks and whatever, but I was so disassociated that I didn't even think I had PTSD, basically. And then when I went back into that reliving thing, the level of heightened emotions and my response to that was really overwhelming. It was crazy, where I was like, oh God, there are all these trigger points of pretty emotional things that happened and how you felt about them. And then you kind of isolate the points, and then you describe what the emotions are that you felt at that time. And when you look at that, you're like, God, that's a lot to process, isn't it? And actually you do need to feel those things, because you can't do them in the moment when you're in the mode of safety. I need to protect myself and all that. And so you have to do that afterwards. And it's just repacking, processing everything, repacking it back in place so that you can go, okay, I get that. And then at the end of the therapy, you go back and you do the reliving again. and then you see where those points are. And the experience of doing it the second time around was just completely different. I was able to just reel what happened off with really, I'm not saying no emotional connection to it, but nowhere near,
as the first time. Yeah,
no, not at all. So it really showed you how far you've come, and how you've processed it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And how do you feel like music has helped you in your healing process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think on the physical side of things, I certainly, I was really concerned about, because I hadn't finished recording all the vocals for the album, and obviously, as a singer, you're using definitely your core muscles, but your back muscles as well, particularly if you're singing in the sort of style that I do, where it's a lot about power, and, I'm using a lot of my body to project and things like that. So I think, I actually think singing and trying to kind of build those core muscles again through singing really helped with my physical recovery, actually. Wow. So that's an amazing thing. And I kind of noticed it physically, it was almost like, I remember the first rehearsal I went back to do after my injury, and it was really hard. We think we did 3 hours rehearsals, and by the end I was kind of sitting on a chair
exhausted,
thinking I'm in agony now, and this is and it was really kind of oh God, is it going to be like this? Because you just don't know how you're going to recover and stuff. But the more and more I rehearsed and the more and more I sang, it almost just, I think it just fueled that recovery process. And also, I suppose it's quite difficult to motivate when you're in pain. It's quite difficult to motivate yourself, isn't it? You're meant to do stretching, and you're meant to do this and that, and the others help you, but it's we're only human. Sometimes it's just I don't want to, But when you've got something that you're kind of working towards, I want to be able to sing these songs properly the way I want to sing them, that kind of really helped me to stay on track with my physiotherapy and all that sort of stuff. But I think from more of a spiritual perspective as well, like we said about, heaven knows, or, those messages that are in the songs are, just helpful to you at different times, aren't they? I'm not saying I go back and listen to my songs all the time, because once you finish writing an album, you're never want to listen to that again. After a little while, you can go back to them, I'm just reaching that point. I sat and listened to the CD, you put it, had to listen to it in the car, and I sat and listened to it through just to make sure it was okay before I got them all printed. And I thought, I can listen to this actually now. I'm there, you know what I mean? Without being oh, no,
God, not again.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, incredible. So, as you know, Mica, I'm a stylist, and I also, talk a lot about spirituality, and I love music as well, sustainable fashion. And for me, our image is very much connected to our inner world, and as we both know, music and fashion go hand in hand. How do you feel about your image as an artist? Is it something you consciously think about a lot, or are you just Mica as you?
I think the thing is, I have a very specific aesthetic. So if I ever ask someone to come and do styling, it's a bit can you help me choose something? Do you know what I mean? But ultimately, I'm going to do it myself a little bit. My image is me, how I dress normally. I suppose it's my friend who's a designer who created a dress for me, said it's just an elevated version, isn't it, of who you already
love
are.
That. Yeah.
I have a specific idea of, what I like. And actually it's been amazing working, because one of my best friends from when I was 3, he's an amazing designer, Dominic Milner, and he has just been he's been designing for other brands, but he's just been starting to do bespoke pieces for people.
Oh, wow.
And we worked on the first dress, 2 dresses he's done for me so far. So one he's done for one of the music videos, which is amazing, and then the other one, and that kind of was born out of an idea that he already had as part of his collection, which we sort of together developed. But then we worked the other day on on a first design of something from scratch, basically, which was like, he'd drawn some things, and I was like, we would do a mood board together, and we'd like this and we like that. And then, we sat down together, we talked about it, he tweaked it, off he went and created it, and ultimately there's an amazing garment that came out. I find that even as somebody who creates, when I watch someone else do that with fashion, I'm just like, this is amazing. And we used it for a front cover shoot feature that's upcoming next month. So excited about that. And, I love creating things that really, because sometimes it's hard to find things that are accurate of what you want and what you see. So I love the idea of creating bespoke pieces. And I love that I've got that relationship with him to be able to do that. And I suppose with my styling, obviously you have to think about that if you're going to go and film something, like we just did a Jazz FM live session the other day, for example. For things like that, or a music video, you kind of need to be thinking about it. But I suppose it's more of a creative thing, right? Like, what are we trying to communicate through this particular outfit, and yeah, I love all of that. The whole thing, aesthetic music is really, I've become much more enthusiastic about aesthetic as I've gotten a bit older. And also since doing the music videos and creatively directing music videos and editing them, I'm just like, oh yeah, like I love this almost as much as I love making music,
Right.
So it's amazing to do something that brings in all of those different elements of creativity and, bring them all together and to reflect who you are more holistically, which is,
absolutely.
I find that really, really enjoyable.
Yeah. Amazing. So if you could sit down with anyone and have a good chat with them, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Is that like past, present, dead or alive sort of vibes?
Whoever, hun.
Well, I always say this, but like I've got a little vision board behind me up there with all different things on it, and I love that vision board because I'm looking at it and I'm like, yes, that's happened. That's happened. That's happened. In the middle of that vision board is a picture of Stevie Wonder. And I've always, I've talked about Stevie Wonder in every bloody interview. People are probably sick of hearing me fangirl over him. But, he's an artist who I discovered when I was really young, like 8 years old. And that's how I fell in love with soul music. So it's always going to be about Stevie for me. And, I love loads of different music and artists. But if I go back to sort of like my roots of my introduction into soul music, I'd say like, it was Stevie Wonder, basically. And I love how inspirational he is in terms of, he writes the songs, he sings amazingly, he's a producer, he can play all the instruments. Like, the whole thing to me is just, and I just get a real sense of like a real spiritual person who has a lot to share in terms of just worldly wise knowledge, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think if I was going to sit down with anybody, it would be Stevie Wonder. And, maybe, fingers crossed, maybe it'll happen one day, given it's on my vision board.
Yeah. I definitely would love to sit down and chat with him as well. Very inspirational man on many levels. Yeah, absolutely. So what's coming up next for you?
Yeah, so, well, I've just actually been editing. I've just finished today the edit for the next music video, which is for a track called More Than You Give Me that's on the album. And I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I was quite stressed. I was like, I've got all this stuff to do and I've got to do video edits. But actually it's not taking me as long as I think I'm getting better and quicker at these sorts of things. So there's that music video coming out, and then there's obviously a couple of others that we filmed earlier that are being edited at the moment, so they'll be coming out. And then obviously I have my two big headline live shows either side of the UK, one in London, one in Manchester. And, that's really exciting for me. London, I've never done a headline show before, and I've always wanted to play a jazz cafe because it's just such a beautiful space and vibey, and lots of amazing musicians have played there. And the Albert Hall show is sort of a crazy idea that I had, and it was born out of the fact that I'd gone with my photographer who did the sleeve photo to Albert Hall and said to them, could we shoot the sleeve artwork in here? And they were like, yeah, sure. So we shot the photo for the sleeve artwork, and the sleeve artwork is me actually just lying on the floor, which I like the idea of that. It was like we were trying to come up with something conceptual that was like, if you have it flat, then it looks like you're lying down. If you have it up that way, it looks like you're, looking forward. And I like the idea of me looking up to heaven and all of that kind of thing.
Nice.
So we, that was the sleeve. But when I was lying on the floor, I thought, God, wouldn't it be amazing to shoot the music video for Heaven Knows here? And then I asked them and they said, yeah, you can shoot the music video. I was like, okay, great. So we shot the music video there. And when I was in there, shooting the music video was just this amazing moment of all of these great creative people all coming together to support me, which was just like really humbling and just like heartwarming. And it was like 40 people in this room who were all amazing at what they did. And it was just the vibiest day. I was in tears at one point, just like, oh my God, I can't believe they were doing this sort of thing. And my backing singers who I've been working with for like 5 years, they did like my first show with me at this tiny 50 capacity venue in Manchester. And it was just this sort of moment where you were like, yeah, do you know what I mean? We're here sort of thing. And when I was in that moment, I was like, we just shot the video for the title track here. We have to do the album launch show here. Like, I can't not, you know what I mean? And so I was like, is this ridiculous? Because it's huge, it's like much bigger than any venue. I've performed in there before doing backing vocals with Peter Hook and the like, but I've never done a headline show that big before. But the space is just so amazing. And I just thought I'm hoping that, and it's looking like it's going to be fine. I'm hoping that a lot of people from like the north of England who've come to see me in Liverpool and Leeds and things will not mind a little bit of travel to Manchester for something a bit more substantial and special. But I just thought, if I'm going to launch this album after all of this work and all of this journey and shooting the video there, it's got to be in this venue. And I'm visualizing this moment of performing the album in that space is just like, it's for my heart, you know what I mean? That's all it's for, for my heart and everyone else's. And I just think it's going to be, I'm just really excited to be on stage and for it to come to fruition. I feel like that will be like a peak moment, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's sort of coming in. And as for the rest, we shall see, lots of different things in the pipeline, but nothing that I can particularly announce at the moment.
Yeah. Heaven knows.
Heaven knows, exactly.
Oh, thank you, Mica, so much. It's been wonderful chatting to you.
You too.
Thank you. And is there any last few words of wisdom you would like to share with our listeners today? Anything that just comes from your heart?
I just think, I suppose, for me, I think it's so important to do what you love and to believe in yourself. And this whole process was a real leap of faith for me. And there were definitely times where I was like, and there still are and still may well be. But I think if you go through life always wondering whether you should have done something, then when you look back, you're going to regret that. And I just think you have to just power through, believe in the universe, believe that when you jump, people will be there to catch you, and go for it. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you once again. Just tell our listeners where they can find you. They can find me on all streaming platforms, all social media platforms. They can find me on YouTube. I've got vinyl, limited edition vinyl and CDs available on Bandcamp. They're going fast, so and there's only 500 of each one. So those are there. YouTube, all the normal platforms. Just search up my name, obviously Millar, spelt with a. It's not pronounced Millar, but I have to say it like that now because everyone does it with an E. But Millar pronounced with a spelt with an A-R at the end. And that's me. Amazing. Thank you so much. Wishing you a wonderful day. Thank you so much for having me on. You're welcome. Really lovely. You're welcome. Thank you, Mica. Lots of love. Ciao. Lots of love to you. Bye. Bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please subscribe to the Lou Stokes podcast. Rate and review in the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're tuning in from. I'd be so grateful. Also, check out the show notes to learn more about my guest and learn more about me on my website, www.loustokes.com. Until next time, be inspired, take action, and become your own icon.